Morant with a running start. Elevates. Oh, it dunks. Oh, my goodness.
Tie game in overtime. Gasol will turn his heat. It's gone. Memphis on top. 7-10 remaining. Conley now with three. Count it. A 15-point lead for Memphis. And Blake Griffin gets into it on the floor with Randolph. Hard to tell if there are any punches being thrown under there, but Griffin took acceptance.
Adams going long. Morant. He hit it. John Morant. Insanity.
You gotta be kidding me.
Welcome to Grits and Grinds, a Memphis Grizzlies podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. Hope you're having a great off season. I'm recording this on Thursday, May 9th. The lottery is coming up on Sunday, May 12th. Of course, a big day for the franchises that are involved. The Grizzlies, of course, are involved, so that's a big thing to look forward to. If you want to watch that lottery with me, by the way, I'll be doing a live playback.tv/fastbreakbreakfast, counting down the lottery and reacting in real time as it occurs. I was going to do a Grizzlies watch party in Nashville, but they changed the lottery from like a Tuesday night to Sunday, Mother's Day afternoon. That's not good for many of us for organizing a weird sporting event at a bar. So thanks, NBA, for that. But if you want to enjoy it vicariously or /online, you can do that at playback.tv/fastbreakbreakfast with me this coming Sunday. So on today's episode, I'm just going to kind of, go over some of the odds of the lottery, if in case you have forgotten, and then look at where the Grizzlies, in the opinion of a very biased Grizzlies podcaster, stack up going forward in the NBA. This is sort of in response to watching the playoffs and watching Anthony Edwards maybe make a leap, watching the young Oklahoma City Thunder look absolutely amazing through the first round and a half of the playoffs. And it's, of course, just thinking about where the Grizzlies now stack up. You know, they've been passed. You could say, I think most everyone would say, like the Thunder and the Timberwolves are teams that have passed the Grizzlies as far as teams maybe you're the most optimistic about going forward. So I'm just going to size up where I think the Grizzlies' core and best players, how they stack up against the other teams in the NBA going forward. Before I do it all, just a word from Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy has raised their deposit match to $250. So if you want to play fantasy sports for cash, you want to do best ball drafts, you want to do some off-season NFL stuff, if you want to do some higher or lowers with the NBA playoffs, you can do all that at Underdog. And now if you sign up using my promo code FBBF or by clicking the link in this episode's description, Underdog will match your opening deposit up to $250. So if you want to try it out, it's a great time to try it out. Use that promo code FBBF, as in Fast Break Breakfast, or click the link in this episode's description. All right, before I get to my future rankings, and to see where the Grizzlies rank among all other NBA teams and their young cores, let's just once again go over the lottery. This Sunday's lottery, of course, the Grizzlies have the 7th best odds in that drawing. The most likely outcome, statistically, is the Grizzlies get the 8th pick. They have a 34% chance at the 8th pick and then a 20% chance at staying at the 7th pick. So better than a 50-50 chance at being 7 or 8. Being 7 or 8, most likely thing that happens. When the Grizzlies end up at 8th or 9th, they have a 13% chance at picking 9th. That's the 3rd most likely slot to end up. When or if those things happen, don't say we got unlucky. Those are highly probable events. There is a 67% chance that we either stay where we are or we drop backwards. That's the most likely thing to happen. There's a 1 in 3 chance, though, we could get lucky and we could jump all the way up. The 4th most likely thing to happen is jumping up to 4th place. 9% chance of that, 8% chance of 3rd. There's a slightly smaller percent chance you end up at 2nd, but it's also around 8% chance. And then there's a 7.5% chance you jump all the way up to the 1st pick. If the Grizzlies get the 1st pick, I mean, it's not the same as getting first picks in other seasons where there was an obvious, clear prize at the top, like, say, the Zion Williamson draft or also the John Morant draft. This is not getting Victor Wembanyama, of course. I mean, Sarr, who seems to be projected to be first most places, like, there's a lot of interesting characteristics of this guy. Very exciting young prospect, but it's not like he's a surefire all-star or anything. But there is a chance, of course, that the Grizzlies could jump all the way up. They basically have almost as good of a chance as anybody. I mean, that's the fun part about the flattened lottery odds. So we get to find out where the Grizzlies end up this Sunday. So I'm very excited about that. Then once we know what the draft pick is, we can start coming up with some more specific plans for the draft, or maybe even some more specific trades and such. But the lottery is always fun. And of course, remember, when the Grizzlies did jump up to get John Morant, they jumped up from 8th. That was a big jump. They're at 7th this time. In past lotteries, the 7th spot has been a particularly lucky spot for teams. Now, of course, past performance does not guarantee future results. Every single drawing, absolutely an independent statistical event. So there's no better, lucky spots over any other spot. But it'll be a big moment for the Grizzlies. Tayshaun Prince, by the way, is going to be the lottery representative for the Grizz for Sunday's drawing. Again, if you want to watch that with me, playback.tv/Fast Break Breakfast. As far as other Grizzlies news, Mark Stein, in his newsletter, he said there are changes to Taylor Jenkins' coaching staff that are expected for next season. I don't know what that means, but as far as unsourced speculation, I can wonder that maybe Taylor Jenkins would reach out to Darvin Ham. Darvin Ham and Taylor Jenkins coached together for 6 seasons on Mike Budenholzer's staff. And a year ago, in the commercial appeal to Michael Cole, described Jenkins and Ham as best friends. So that sounds like a possibility to me. Beyond that, as far as the Grizzlies news, there's really not much of anything. I mean, Jaren Jackson Jr. appeared on Inside the NBA on Wednesday night. He just, talked about how he doesn't like not being in the playoffs. That was about it. John Morant changed his representation a couple of weeks ago. He's now with Mike Miller's agency, which also represents Paolo Banchero, some other NBA players. Adam Silver said he's checked in with John Morant. Okay, I mean, that's barely news for me. But, Adam Silver said John Morant's doing great or whatever. Also, things to cheer for in the lottery. I feel like other years I've had very specific things I was pulling for if it didn't go the Grizzlies' way. Like, oh, we really need to make sure this player doesn't end up in the Western Conference. I think because of the lack of a superstar in this draft, I don't really have strong feelings. I mean, I guess we don't want maybe the Spurs or Rockets to end up with the first pick, but I don't know if it honestly really matters, although I guess those could be famous last words. But let's look right now at where I think the Grizzlies stack up among other NBA teams. Initially, I was thinking about just the Western Conference, and this specifically was in regards to the Thunder and Timberwolves being undefeated in the playoffs so far, and Anthony Edwards being amazing, and thinking about how, hey, a couple of years ago, we were the hot young team that was great and was like the team everyone was like, that's the team I want to be going forward. That's the most exciting young core in the NBA. And of course, things have not gone to design the last couple of seasons. They took a step back a couple of years ago. There's the arguments about what they did with the roster, the tripling down on youth, and of course the Steven Adams and Brandon Clark injuries really hampered what the team's vision was for the 2023 season. And then, of course, the 2024 season started off with a jaw suspension, massive injuries. You never got a look at what the vision was. And, of course, you ended up with this horrible 27-win campaign, which has resulted in the Grizzlies finishing with the 7th worst record and thus having us all keeping an eye on the draft lottery. But with Anthony Edwards making another little leap or big leap, and with the Thunder looking so good and with Shea being so good, I think most Grizzlies fans, and I know I have, we have sort of accepted that those players, Shea and Anthony Edwards, have passed Ja Morant as far as not just how good of a player they are, but the idea that those guys probably always going to be better than Ja Morant. The Shea one, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, the guy is better at offense and then a far superior defensive player. I don't think it's a controversial opinion. Shea, much better at scoring, much better at drawing fouls, much better at shooting. The one bad thing from like Ja Morant's 9 games he played, outside of the fact that he just played 9 games, he also still wasn't hitting shots. Now, say whatever you will about that. He was rusty. Shooting, of course, is never going to be probably the strength of his game. And shooting is not the strength of Shea's game, but he can get to a mid-range jumper. He can score from a lot of different levels. And he's a fine three-point shooter, even if he's a high-volume three-point shooter. Ja Morant's never been a fine three-point shooter. So I think we have to accept, going forward, if you ask an impartial observer, which team would you rather be going forward? You're going to take the Thunder. And I don't know if the Grizzlies will be better than the Thunder next year when they're fully healthy. I sort of doubt it, but they have a chance. I think they're a comparable team. They should be very, very good. But I think we can clearly say like the Thunder have a better situation going forward. They have all of these first-round picks, and beyond Shea, they have Jalen Williams, who's amazing. They have Chet Holmgren, who's amazing. And so they have plenty of options to improve their team going forward, and they're already really, really good. Of course, they finished with the 1 seed in the regular season, and as I record this right now, they're up 1-0 over the Dallas Mavericks in the second round. So, I don't think it's controversial to say the Thunder have passed the Grizzlies, and we are now chasing that team. As far as the Timberwolves, when you think about the Gobert trade and how it was roundly criticized, I criticized it. It didn't work out great for him last year, but now it's basically come into fruition, this perfect vision of a really impressive, dominant defensive team that overwhelms you with size. And then you have Anthony Edwards, who looks like an absolute superstar. And it's kind of funny as Grizzlies fans to think about maybe one of the motivations for the Gobert trade. Like one of the biggest motivations for the Gobert trade was that Brandon Clark destroyed the Timberwolves in the playoffs. Brandon Clark got so many offensive rebounds. Also, John Conchar destroyed the Timberwolves in a game a couple of seasons ago. He had 17 rebounds in a game. It's quite literally, in my mind, why they went and got Rudy Gobert. They said they had to control the glass. So because of the Grizzlies beating them and the way they beat them, they went out and made the Rudy Gobert trade. They also went out and signed Kyle Anderson. And now this team is super good. And right now, they look to be one of the favorites to win the NBA title this season. Now, when you think about future rankings, you probably have to incorporate the fact that the Timberwolves are going to have a lot of salary concerns. They're probably not going to be a second apron team. They likely can't bring back like Kyle Anderson. But what are they going to do with the rest of the roster? Well, they still have Cat and Gobert and Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid and Mike Conley. Paying all those guys is going to be difficult. We haven't seen a team really go this road that isn't the Clippers or the Warriors when it comes to this amount of luxury tax. So they have challenges, but still going forward, you'd say because of Anthony Edwards' ascendancy and the fact that I think he's a better player than Ja Morant, this team is better set up going forward because so much of the NBA, I think, is about who your best player is. So I think, again, not controversial to say, it looks like the Timberwolves and Thunder have comfortably passed the Grizzlies as far as which team you'd rather be going forward. Now, I do get encouraged when I start looking at all the other teams in the NBA and now think, you know what? The Grizzlies, basically, they're as well set up, I think, as anybody else. That is, except for maybe the other contenders this year, and I have them as contenders going forward. That's the Celtics and the Nuggets. Like, as long as the Celtics have their squad together, we're chasing that team. The Grizzlies are not nearly that good. And also, as long as the Nuggets have Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray and Aaron Gordon, they're going to be great. And I think they will have a chance to actually improve their roster this offseason. They had a lot of limitations what they could do this past offseason, and maybe they take a tiny step back, but they'll be able to do some things this upcoming offseason to once again build around Jokic. So I think when I'm looking at like future power rankings in the NBA, or just which team I would rather be the GM of going forward, I think Thunder, Timberwolves, Celtics, Nuggets, I'd put all of those easily ahead of the Grizzlies. Now, if you're a fan of the Grizzlies, you're probably saying, I'd rather have the Grizzlies. That's fair. I'm not really that worried about it. I think consensus would be those teams are better set up going forward and have better overall players. Like the Grizzlies' best players, the positives, of course, Ja, Jaren, Dez, all still relatively young, all of them under contract for at least the next 2 seasons. But who's the best among those? Ja Morant, where does he rank among the best players in the NBA? Behind a lot of these guys. Behind Jason Tatum. Behind Anthony Edwards. Behind Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Also, you'd say behind Luka Doncic. I think right now you could say the Mavericks have just as good of a future as anybody with Luka Doncic on the team. They are out a lot of first-round picks. They've gone ahead and made a bunch of moves. Of course, bringing in Kyrie Irving. The moves just to get Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington cost draft capital going forward. But still, if you have Luka Doncic, who's a better overall player than Ja Morant, you can make a strong argument they are better set up going forward. But I still think the Grizzlies are probably, this is the tier of team. I think they're basically even with the Mavericks. There's good and bad. The Grizzlies have more younger players. They've got a stronger overall team, I think, wrapped up, and also they have all their draft picks. They get to add this, top 10 draft pick in this coming year. So I think it's very, very even between the Mavericks and the Grizzlies. Like when I look at all the teams, I initially did it just as the Western Conference again. In the Western Conference, the top of the class, it's the Thunder, it's the Timberwolves, it's the Nuggets. If you include the Eastern Conference, then you have the Celtics. Let's just say those 4 teams, I think the top of the class going forward in the NBA right now. A lot of this, I'm ignoring aging teams. I think maybe one of the good things for Grizzlies fans watching this year's playoffs is it seems like a lot of the classically great teams we were trailing this year or thought we had to catch this year, it looks like many of those teams are just aging out. The Suns. They do not have a brighter future than the Grizzlies. They are essentially all in for this past season. It didn't go well. They got swept by the Timberwolves. They can run it back again next year and should be very, very good, but I think the future is much brighter for the Grizzlies. Like the Suns aging out. The Warriors, they got some problems. They didn't make the playoffs. Warriors aging out. I think Lakers aging out. Clippers aging out. Those are teams I don't worry about that much. But when you look at the Western Conference, honestly, I think it's the Mavericks and the Grizzlies are the next 2 teams you would take as far as like picking who would you rather be or which team would you rather control going forward. The only other team I would think you would consider, maybe there's a couple, you might consider the Spurs because of Victor Wembanyama. There's a possible ascendancy there, but beyond Victor, they have basically nothing. You can look at the Rockets. The Rockets have a lot of positive pieces. Great seasons from Jalen Green. Amen Thompson had a good rookie year. Alperen Şengün, nice player. Of course, they have solid veterans in Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks. Jabari Smith is there. They got a lot of interesting pieces, but still, I don't know who the big superstar alpha player is among those guys. And I would say they're behind the Grizzlies alpha players. They don't have a player as good as Ja Morant. They don't have a player as good as, I don't think, Desmond Bane, but they'd probably argue maybe Jalen Green projects to be better or something. But you think about the Rockets and the Spurs as teams in a possible ascendancy, and then the Pelicans are this just huge question mark. And I think if anyone is down on the Grizzlies' future, just because you're I can't trust Ja Morant, I just can't trust him physically. Even if you ignore off the court stuff, you're saying, all right, how's this guy going to age as a point guard? He's so reliant on athleticism. He's shown not much progress as a shooter. How's that guy going to age as a player? I'd rather have, this other player, player X. The same concerns are what you would say about the Pelicans. That's the reason you wouldn't put the Pelicans high here, because you're well, they're done with Brandon Ingram, and are you really going to depend on Zion? The players you're most excited about on the Pelicans, it's Herb Jones and Trey Murphy. And those guys are just good starter level. So the Pelicans, they have a lot of picks. They have some nice players, but I think they have more question marks than the Grizzlies do right now. Maybe that's a biased take, but I would rather be the Grizzlies. Another team kind of similar to the Pelicans is the Jazz. The Jazz have Larry Markkinen, who's great. Colin Sexton had like a nice season last year, but like I don't know what the Jazz are doing. And the Jazz don't have any, again, like top line, all NBA level players. And so I think the Grizzlies' future is brighter than the Jazz. And then like the only teams left in the Western Conference I haven't mentioned are the Kings, who are fine. I mean, De'Aaron Fox, you could say, looks better than Ja Morant this last year. That might be true. Maybe you'd rather have De'Aaron Fox. If you polled a bunch of NBA fans that weren't either Kings or Grizzlies fans, it might be kind of even. Just because Ja Morant hasn't done anything in the NBA in over a year. And we have short memories when it comes to assessing NBA talent. But like maybe you would take the Kings' future over the Grizzlies. But I think the combination of Ja Morant plus Desmond Bane plus Jaren Jackson Jr. plus G.G. Jackson, Vince Williams, also having Marcus Smart, Brandon Clark. To me, it seems like the Grizzlies' future is a little bit brighter there. And then when you look at the East, I said the Celtics are better. You'd rather the Celtics going forward. Then you basically get to the teams that have superstars, but a lot of other huge question marks, which is the Bucks with Giannis and the Sixers with Joel Embiid. I mean, Embiid has Maxey, but like they are slightly aging now as far as superstars in Joel and Giannis, and their supporting casts are just, again, giant question marks. The Sixers, of course, have a ton of cap space. Maybe they're going to add Paul George, who, by the way, is super old. So maybe you'd rather be the Sixers. Maybe you'd rather be the Bucks just because of having that elite top-tier MVP level talent. That's fair. I'm not going to argue with you. You might look at the Knicks. I think one of the interesting questions in the NBA right now is like who would you rather have as your point guard, Jalen Brunson or Ja Morant? I've basically always thought Ja Morant was better than Jalen Brunson, but what Jalen Brunson is doing right now, I have a hard time envisioning Ja Morant doing that. Jalen Brunson acting as the heliocentric offensive carrier for the Knicks, who are a couple of wins away from the conference finals. I mean, Jalen Brunson just finished 5th in the MVP vote. And if you want to kind of poke holes in like the Knicks for whatever reason, you'd say, well, they didn't even win that many games in the East this year. The Grizzlies won more games the previous 2 seasons in a tougher Western Conference than the Knicks did this year. And so far, the Knicks have beaten a banged-up Sixers squad, and now they're beating an unimpressive Pacers team. So maybe you would think the Grizzlies could be a better team than the Knicks. But the Knicks right now, I mean, Brunson's relatively young. He's 27. And they have a lot of other good pieces around him, and they got a lot of other options. Like they're going to move on from Julius Randle, possibly. Like they have OG Anunoby, they have Dante DiVincenzo. You assume they're going to keep Isaiah Hartenstein. Like the Knicks seem like they're well set up going forward. I think that's a team that you would consider, along with the Grizzlies and the Mavericks, as teams you'd be totally cool with taking over. If you wanted to pick any NBA team's future, the Knicks would be one of the higher teams that you would select. But then like beyond them, I don't know if there's a team in the East I would rather be than the Grizzlies. Like the Cavaliers? I mean, Donovan Mitchell, better player, but not certainly going to be a part of the Cavaliers going forward. We don't know if he's a franchise cornerstone. He might be moving on. The Orlando Magic, very nice breakthrough season for them. Paolo Banchero. I think it's a fair debate to have. Who would you rather have going forward, Paolo or Ja? But like, Ja's already proven a lot more. And also, you get Ja and Desmond and Jaren, and there's no one close on the Magic as far as secondary players that are anywhere near the level of Jaren and Desmond. So like, I'd rather be the Grizzlies than the Magic. I mean, the Pacers, all right, you got Halliburton, Siakam, and Miles Turner. I think Jaren, Desmond, and Ja, that's a better combination. The Heat seem to be aging out. The Hawks, I mean, that team's totally lost. The Nets and the Bulls and Raptors, those have no blue chippers at all. I mean, maybe Mikal Bridges, sort of. I mean, that's teams I struggle to see the vision of what they're doing. And then like the bottom of the East, the Hornets, the Wizards, and the Pistons. And the Hornets have Brandon Miller and hopes that LaMelo stays healthy and or is good. Pistons and Wizards just have nothing but dreams and aspirations of doing stuff. So I think when we look at the future of the NBA right now, and I think we probably are thinking a lot about it when we see the success the Timberwolves and Anthony Edwards are having, and we see the success that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander and Jalen Williams and Chet Holmgren and the Thunder are having. And even when we see Luka Doncic play, we're like, all right, we're trailing those teams, and we thought we were ahead of those teams, and we've hit some speed bumps. We've made some detours, and so now we're chasing these teams we once felt we were comfortably ahead of. But I think the other good news is there aren't a lot of teams whose rosters I would take over the Grizzlies, and some of these other pretty good teams or teams we've been accustomed of being quite good, I think they're aging out, while the Grizzlies guys are all still very much in the primes of their careers. They're very, very young. So I think when I sum the whole thing up, I think the only 4 teams that I would clearly rather have their rosters than the Grizzlies roster going forward, I would say it's the Thunder, the Timberwolves, the Nuggets, and the Celtics. And I am fine with a person disagreeing and rather taking the Grizzlies over some of those other ones. I think I'd rather have the other teams' situations, but, to each their own. And then I think the Grizzlies are in the next tier, where I would say the Mavericks and the Grizzlies and maybe the Knicks are in that as far as having bright futures. I mean, maybe I'm overestimating the Knicks. And maybe I'm underestimating teams with established superstars like the Sixers and the Bucks. And maybe I'm overvaluing just optimism. The idea that, hey, young players can get better, possessing all your draft picks can actually turn into good things. And the Grizzlies' top player maybe not being a top 5 player in the NBA, maybe that's an overall limiting factor. Maybe for that reason, you'd rather take the Spurs. Victor Wembanyama might be the most dominant player in the NBA for the next 10 years, and I would rather have one Victor Wembanyama, one A-plus superstar, over a bunch of B+/A- level guys. If I'm calling Jaren, Desmond, and Ja kind of A- guys. No disrespect intended, but that's, I think, a fair argument to make. But building rosters is hard. And what the Grizzlies already have, I think, is so far ahead of what a lot of teams could even get to, is the reason why I'm still fine with where the Grizzlies are going forward. And then it's all kind of teams that there's too many question marks, and you just hope that they don't make missteps in the future. Teams like the Rockets and the Jazz and the Pelicans and the Blazers. Those are the teams in the middle of I think my optimistic rankings or young cores or just rosters I'd rather have going forward. Then there's just a bunch of other teams where they have a lot of issues facing them as their best players age out, or they don't have any good players. And that's of course, the bottom of the East, the Bulls, Hornets, Wizards, Pistons, and then the aging out teams. Most of them feel like they're in the West: Warriors, Lakers, Suns, Clippers. Of course, you can include the Heat from the Eastern Conference in that. The Pacers, again, maybe the Pacers should be in there along with the Mavericks and the Grizzlies and the Knicks, Sixers, that kind of thing. I'm not going to be very picky. I haven't nailed down my exact 1 through 30 rankings, more of a tiered thought. But anyways, I had just been thinking, watching these playoff games, just about where Ja and the rest of the Grizzlies players kind of fit as far as how optimistic should we be? How frightened should we be with how good Anthony Edwards is, with how good the Thunder are, and then also with how promising Victor Wembanyama looks, and then whichever team ends up winning the lottery. But those are just my thoughts for today. Again, if you want to watch the lottery with me, do that on Sunday at playback.tv/fastbreakbreakfast. If you want to support this show, do that at patreon.com/fastbreakbreakfast. All right, hope you guys have a great weekend. I'll talk to you soon. Go Grizz.